I have a question for you. Can the GOP abolish or diminish the 14th Amendment? One of the three biggest amendments to the U.S. Constitution regarding African Americans. Can they abolish or diminish the 14th Amendment? And if so, what would be the implications for African Americans? That's what I want to talk about tonight on the 155th anniversary of the 14th Amendment. Stay with me. So the question tonight is, can the GOP diminish or abolish one of the most important amendments to the U.S. Constitution for us African Americans? And the answer is yes, they can. They absolutely can, and that is their master plan. They have already gutted the 14th Amendment, the Voting Rights Act. They've already gutted the Voting Rights Act. It is gutted. It is gutted. So now they can pretty much do what they want to do regarding voting. They have gotten rid of affirmative action. It's still, I'm going to explain that in a future video, that affirmative action, parts of it still stands, but it's been so rolled back that it pretty much means nothing. So if they're able to gut the 14th Amendment, folks, the 14th Amendment, I keep saying the 14th, the Voting Rights Act. If they're able to gut the Voting Rights Act, then what's next? I believe it is the 14th Amendment. That's what I want to talk to you about tonight, because I'm telling you, these are huge, huge, huge stakes for the African American community. So I'm going to school you tonight on how they're going about trying to do this and what the implications for the African American community would be. That's what we're going to get into tonight. Before we do, yes, this is Augustus Corbett, Attorney Augustus Corbett, AKA the Minister of Justice, one half of the Defiant Lawyers, who each and every week bring you a legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you to defy this unjust legal system. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe, like, share, and comment on tonight's video. Wow, so yes, we are in a struggle with the GOP. They are doing everything they can to roll back gains for the African American community. And my concern, as always, is African American people really don't understand. We really don't get it. A lot of African Americans, unlike me, are Democrats. I'm not a Democrat, nor am I a Republican. But a lot of African Americans are Democrats. And so they tend to depend on Democrats to sort of keep them informed about what's really going on. But that is a very unreliable way to stay informed, because many of the Democrats are white Americans, and the 14th Amendment has very little, if anything, to do with white Americans, with white Democrats, with liberal Democrats. They couldn't care less. What they really want are our continued votes, right? And I'm not disparaging Democrats. I'm not, again, a Democrat nor a Republican. But white Democrats stand to lose very little of anything if the 14th Amendment is demolished or if it is diminished. like white Democrats don't lose a whole lot from the Voting Rights Act being gutted. Those laws were passed and those amendments added to the Constitution pretty much for the benefit of Black Americans. So they don't care. Don't rely on them to be in the know, to know what's going on, to get your understanding. No. The GOP is determined to roll back all types of laws, amendments to the U.S. Constitution that brings any sort of benefit to the African American community on a bunch of cockeyed conspiracy theories. The GOP is really clever, very clever in the way they do things. First of all, they play the long game. Gutting the Voting Rights Act has been on their playlist for at least 50 years. At least, longer than that, right? Ever since it was signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson. Ever since then, they have been working, scheming, and so forth to get rid of the 14th Amendment. The Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the 14th, 13th Amendment too. 15th Amendment, anything to benefit African American people, they are against. I'm speaking truth here. I am an attorney, a civil rights lawyer, a criminal defense lawyer. I am very familiar with the U.S. Constitution. I've been studying it now for over 20 years. Over 20 years. So I'm coming to you with knowledge, with experience, and with love for the African American community and for America. America needs the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. America needs the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Opportunity Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1865, 1866. America needs that. Those laws made America better. They made America better. This is not just about African Americans. This is about America at large. So yes, the GOP is hell-bent on diminishing or completely abolishing the 14th Amendment. Let's take a look at that. So one of the first things I want to do tonight is, yes, I want us to celebrate the fact that today, July 9th, 2023, marks the 155th anniversary of the 14th Amendment. Today marks the 155th anniversary of the 14th Amendment. You know I could not let this day go without commenting on this, especially given all of the battles that we're seeing play out in our political landscape in this country. The 14th Amendment is critical to the African American community. We have to protect it with our lives. It is that important. We shouldn't even need the 14th Amendment, right? I mean, the Declaration of Independence said it all, that it is self-evident that all men are created, all men are equal, and how does it go? It is self-evident that all men are created equal and are endued with certain inalienable rights. Among them are the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. I mean, that says it all, but that didn't apply to Black Americans. When the signatories signed that document, they did not have Black Americans in mind. If only we were in mind in that document, we wouldn't need the 13th Amendment because there would have never been slavery. I mean, how can you enslave someone if you feel like they are equal and created with certain inalienable rights. They would have never instituted slavery. They would have never transported African Americans here and enslaved them if we were in mind when they created the Declaration of Independence. But we were not in their minds. We are not created equal in their minds. So the country had to fight a bloody war to end slavery, had to amend the Constitution to say to white America that under our law going forward, you can't enslave these folks. Had to add or amend the Constitution to say to white America that these folks have certain rights under our Constitution that are protected by the 14th Amendment, which we're getting ready to look at. And that these folks have the right to vote. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the so-called Reconstruction Amendments, which are still critical to this day. So let's talk about the 14th Amendment. And again, we ought to be very, very, very appreciative of the 14th Amendment. Very appreciative. Very, very appreciative. Yes. Yes, absolutely. All right. Now, okay, what exactly does the 14th Amendment say that is so critical? Why am I so celebratory on one hand and so concerned on the other hand? Because of language in the 14th Amendment. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Why is that language so important? Because Chief Justice Roger Taney, who wrote the Dred Scott decision, the awful, terrible Dred Scott decision that essentially found the fugitive slave law to be constitutional, said in that opinion that Black Americans had no rights that whites were obligated to respect. No rights. Why? Because they were not citizens, because they were children of African women. So if they were children of African women, then we were not considered citizens, therefore had no rights under the Dred Scott opinion. That precipitated the Civil War. The enslaved Africans and the white abolitionists said, we now must take this to the next level. Because this opinion, if this remains the law of the land, imagine folks, if Dred Scott was the law of the land today. All of us who can trace our lineage back to an African woman would not be citizens, would have no rights, none. The rights that we take for granted today, we wouldn't have any of those rights under the Dred Scott opinion. It could not stand. It could not stand. It is the worst Supreme Court case ever written. The worst, bar none. Okay? So the Civil War occurred. Thank God Southern states lost. And for a 10-year period, African Americans were elected to Congress and were able to get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments added to the Constitution. So the 14th Amendment starts out by saying, whoever is born in this state or naturalized in this state, that is, they immigrate to the state and go through the naturalization process, will be citizens. So, because we are now citizens by merely being born in this country, that gives us certain rights that the states, southern states in particular, that's who were trying to take all the rights from African Americans and the northern states, but the southern states were just very, very aggressive about it. Of course, they were angry and teed and bitter because they lost the Civil War and lost all their enslaved chattel property and so forth. So they wanted to, as quickly as possible, get these black folk back in their position. So they created black code laws, Jim Crow, and all of that. But the 14th Amendment says, let's bring this back up. The 14th Amendment says that if we're born in this country, regardless of the ancestry of our forefathers, we're citizens. Very important, because the next sentence says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States. So the first thing the 14th Amendment does, it gives us citizenship. The second thing it says is, because of our citizenship, we have certain privileges and immunities that states cannot abridge or violate. Things, again, that we take for granted today. Rights, privileges, immunities that we don't think twice about today. They are protected because of the 14th Amendment. That's how important this is. So watch what it says. If you're born here, you are a citizen, and because you are a citizen, a state cannot enact a law that violates citizenship rights and citizenship immunities. Nor, it goes on to say, can any state deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Without due process of law. Now watch this. This says, nor shall any state deprive any person. Notice it didn't say any citizen. Any person of life, liberty, or property. So even non-citizens have right to due process of law. But of course, citizens do. So we as citizens, and even those who are in the country, even illegally, have certain due process rights. Now, some folks have angst with that. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Some folks have an issue with that. I don't, because America, that is one thing that I do appreciate about these Reconstruction amendments. They said that we're not going to be a barbaric country. If somebody is in our country, even if they're here legally, we're going to treat them fair. Why is that important? That's important because if you read the Bible, God told Israel to treat aliens fair. Treat them fair. Yeah, protect your borders, but if they're here, treat them fairly. So that's what this is. You can't just think about it. Think about it. Without this here, the police, law enforcement, the country could round up illegal immigrants and kill them without any due process, without any court proceedings, without appointing them a lawyer, without any rights. So this says person, but of course it includes citizens. So we, under this provision of the 14th Amendment, have the right to due process. Due process means they got to file a petition. They got to have a neutral judge before they can deprive us of our life, liberty, or property. Because remember, enslaved Africans had none of these rights. The plantation owner could kill them, had already made them chattel property, so they had no liberty. And they could not own property as chattel property because they were property. So this particular part of the 14th Amendment said, no, you cannot continue depriving these people of their life, liberty, and property without due process of law. Without due process of law. Nor, it goes on to say, can any state deny any person, not just citizen, any person within its jurisdiction, the equal protection of the law. Oh, that's so important. That's so important. That says, under the law, this is the ideal. This is not, mind you, this is not what happens on a daily basis. I'm in the courthouses every day, Chloe and I, and we can tell you from firsthand experience, and you don't even need our anecdotal experience, just do your research, and you'll see that this language is the ideal, but it's not what happens practically. But ideally, any person, including citizens, are supposed to have the same protection under the law as white people. The same protection. We know it's not true. We know, for example, in death penalty cases, if a black man is accused of killing a white person, his chances of being put to death skyrockets. And if you flip that, if a white person is accused of killing a black person, his chance of going to death row is greatly reduced. And I could go on and on and on. But we as attorneys, we will remind the state when we're representing people of this language in the 14th Amendment. All right? So I think we need to give another great shout out to the 14th Amendment for giving us citizenship, for protecting our privileges and immunities, for protecting our due process rights, for making us ideally equal under the law. Equal under the law, ideally. That is huge. But what happens? What happens if the GOP is able to demolish the 14th Amendment or diminish it? And don't you sit there and think that they can't do it. They can do it. They can do it. It's within their reach. Right now, it's within their reach. Again, if they were able to gut the Voting Rights Act, don't think anything was sacred. The Brown versus Board of Education case, which desegregated schools, don't think any of this, anything that, again, tries to redress the fact that African Americans have been systemically oppressed in this country, they are trying to overturn it. Bit by bit, chip by chip, brick by brick. It's been their long game intention for many years. I would say as far back as the Civil War. In many respects, you know, there was a Reconstruction period that lasted about 10 years, and then this so-called redemption period, where the South said, we're going to rise again. Okay? That tension has never ended. We're still fighting those same demons. We're still fighting those same wars. All right? Now, how might the GOP diminish or even abolish the 14th Amendment? And again, don't think they're not trying to do this. They've admitted it. They've actually said it. I'm going to show you in a moment where they've actually admitted to trying to do this. White conservatives are trying to diminish or completely abolish the 14th Amendment. And there are two ways that they can try to accomplish this. Number one, through SCOTUS. The Supreme Court of the United States. Number two, Article 5 of the Constitution. So how would they do it through SCOTUS? Just find the appropriate cases and file cases in federal court, and then get those cases in front of this current conservative Supreme Court. 6 completely, totally conservative, right-wing, extreme judges. 6 out of 9. They control the court. They do whatever they want to do. They're in that position. Again, all of that is the result of the GOP's long game. They've been planning this for years, and they got the fix in. They got it in. They got 3 justices in under Trump. That was the thing Trump promised the GOP. You back me, I will get you 3 very conservative GOP justices on the court. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Barrett, who are relatively young people who will be on the court for the next 20, 30 years if nothing happens. They can serve on the court until they're tired. There's no term limit. They can just stay there unless they do something that's impeachable. And these folks have been in this war against civil rights, all of the ones I just mentioned. John Roberts, Chief Justice, he cut his teeth in the Reagan administration fighting Voting Rights Act, fighting all of these civil rights acts, laws. They've been in this. These folks are handpicked and have specialized training to accomplish what they are accomplishing. 6 of them on the court, including Clarence Thomas, who is just, to be a black man. I will withhold my fire for now. Okay? But SCOTUS, just file cases and get them in front of the Supreme Court. And no matter how crazy their arguments are, they got 6 people who will support those arguments and find legal ways to overturn precedent. We have this thing in the law called stare decisis. And that basically means that when there has been precedence on a case, you pretty much follow it because it's important for the consistency of our law that some things be established. I mean, some things ought to be established and not subject to or vulnerable to the political whims of the country. But when you have 6 ideologues on the court who have an agenda, either liberal or conservative, then nothing is sacred. Nothing. Anything can go in the air depending on the number of people on the court. And then it doesn't help to learn that some justices on the court have been receiving gifts, allegedly from billionaires who have business directly or indirectly in front of the court. That doesn't help at all. Not at all. So SCOTUS absolutely is in a position to do whatever it pleases. So whatever case the GOP brings in front of SCOTUS, it is not a long shot to get many of the civil rights that we have benefited from, and I mean the country has benefited from for the last 50 or 60 years are in the balance. And if you've been listening to me, I have been sounding the alarm for years, especially to my black conservative friends. Okay? And look, let me say this. I'm right of center. I am conservative on issues. I am, and strongly disagree with the Democrats on issues. Folks assume that because I have such strong passion against systemic racism, they assume that I'm a liberal. They assume that. They would be wrong. They would be wrong. I am right of center. But I do despise, absolutely despise, white supremacy and systemic racism, which is a huge part of not only our history and legacy, but also of our current situation. The second way that the GOP can abolish the 14th Amendment or diminish it is again through Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Now, what Article 5, just a minute. What Article 5 says is Article 5 of the Constitution provides two ways to propose amendments to the document, to the Constitution. Amendments may be proposed either by the Congress through a joint resolution passed by a 2/3 vote. So if the GOP currently controls the House. If the GOP also controls the Senate, all right, and has a 2/3 majority in both houses, in both chambers, then they can propose an amendment to the Constitution. An amendment that says the 14th Amendment needs to be amended. An amendment that says the 14th Amendment needs to be abolished. And I'm going to show you in just a moment that is on their minds. You're going to hear it from their own mouths. So if in 2024, the GOP keeps the House and controls, I don't know if they have a 2/3 majority in the House. No, they don't, because it's pretty close. It's kind of tight. So let's say they increase their numbers in the House to a 2/3 majority, increase their numbers in the Senate or win the Senate and get 2/3 of majority there, then they can propose an amendment to the Constitution, just like that. Just that simple. Or, here's the other way, or by a convention. They can call a convention by Congress in response to applications from 2/3 of the state legislatures. So if the GOP controls 2/3 of the state legislatures, then they can make an application to Congress. Congress has to call a convention, and there they can try to amend the Constitution. Okay? By, again, amending the 14th Amendment or just making the argument it just should be abolished completely. Just completely abolish it on this notion that you'll see in just a moment. So, 2/3 vote by the Congress, if the GOP were able to get to that point, or by 2/3 of the state legislatures. If they control 2/3 of the state legislatures, they can then make a proposal to amend some part of the Constitution. Well, how close are they? They're quite a bit of ways from 2/3 majority control of the Congress, but they are not a long ways away from 2/3 of the states. Right now, the GOP controls 28 states. 28 out of 50. Okay? They only need 5 more. 5 more. Just take 5 more state legislatures. They don't even have to have the governor seat. Take my home state of North Carolina. You got Roy Cooper there, who is a Democrat, but the GOP control the legislature. And so they're able to override anything he does. He can veto whatever they put in front of him, but then they can override his veto. So they control the state of North Carolina. Period. Whatever they want to do, they can do now. And control the North Carolina Supreme Court. And see, we're talking about a GOP that has been radicalized by Trump. Trump changed everything. And why did he change everything? Out of fear, white fear. What do they fear? That black and brown people are taking over the country. Exhibit 1 in their minds, as proof of that, Barack Obama. His election and re-election. And now Kamala Harris. They are exhibit 1 and 2. That Trump is right, that if they don't stand up and be strong and overtake the Capitol and whatever they got to do, they'll lose their country. He tapped into that fear. And so they've been radicalized. They've been radicalized. And unfortunately, there are quite a few black conservatives who are, wow. I'll just say that. Wow. Okay. So, very close to having 2/3 of the state legislatures, just 5 more states. I'm not a political scientist. I don't know the intricacies of state elections that are coming up in 2024, but it's conceivable that they could pick up those 5 seats in 2024, and then would have enough to file application with Congress and say we want to propose changing this or that or this and the other regarding the Constitution. I think they would go after the 14th Amendment. That's what I believe their sights are on. Okay? Now, as proof that their sights are on the 14th Amendment, let me pull you up a video. Let me pull you up a couple videos. Okay. Just work with me here. Need to pull up these videos. So let's talk about how they would try, one of the ways they could try to get SCOTUS.
It's now ruled that it's illegal.
Now, this is a conversation had by Will Cain, who is a sports commentator, and Stephen A. Smith about affirmative action. Some things are said in this interview that shows you the thinking of white conservatives. Will Cain is definitely a white conservative. All right, so let's go back. I got the video teed up. Let's put it on.
Well, the Supreme Court has now ruled that it's illegal to consider race in college admissions. Now, most Americans agree with last week's decision. A recent CBS News poll found that 70% of Americans oppose race being used in a factor in admissions. And even 60% of Democrats oppose race as a factor, according to a New York Times poll. But there was a backlash to the ruling. My old friend Stephen A. Smith had a lot to say about the decision.
Here's where I get ticked off. I get ticked off that white America gets to sit back and act like they're innocent in all of the things that have been transpiring to the point where it ignited their furor to such a degree that they felt the need to oppose such things. The iniquities that have taken place in this country against minority communities, who exacted that? Who displayed that? Who exercised those actions? Who were the instigators and perpetrators of all of that? Who was that exactly? Wasn't that white America? I think it was.
Stephen A. Smith, the host of the Stephen A. Smith Show and First Take on ESPN, joins us now. Stephen A., great to see you, man.
Now, what Stephen A. said there was strong, it was spirited, it was passionate, and it was correct. But it wasn't complete. It wasn't complete. And Will Cain, being an attorney, Will Cain is throwing out certain things that Stephen A. just doesn't understand. I'm going to address those things.
What's going on, buddy? How you doing, man?
You want me to just go right at that clip? Is that how we should do this? Should we just start right there?
Feel.
Okay. There's no such thing.
Let's go. I'm here.
I know you are. The problem is, Stephen A., in truth, when it comes to justice, there is no such thing as Black America and white America. There are only individuals.
Okay.
And so when you assign culpability...
Okay, right there. Doesn't it sound so cute? And wouldn't that be so wonderful if it were true? Wouldn't it be so wonderful if there was no Black America, no white America? After all, the 14th Amendment says we're all equal under the law. Yeah, Will Cain says there's no Black America, no white America. There are only individuals. Only individuals. Will Cain has a very specific reason he's saying that. He's not saying that to have a kumbaya moment with Stephen A. Smith. No. Nope. He's not saying that because, he's wanting to connect with Stephen A. Smith on a deep personal level. No. He has a legal reason for saying that. Hold on. I'm explaining.
To individuals of the past, to individuals of today, there's simply nothing to hold anyone accountable for. Why do I pay the price for the sins of the past and you reap the benefits in the case of affirmative action? I'm not saying you.
Okay. So let's talk about these individual rights. Okay. Why is Will King saying that? Why are conservatives saying that? Well, the ones who know the law, they're saying it for a particular reason. The other ones are saying it because they hear other white conservatives saying it, right? How many videos have we seen already of your everyday run-of-the-mill white conservatives saying, I hate critical race theory, and somebody say, well, could you explain what it is? I don't know what it is, but I hate it. Why do you hate it? Well, Fox News said you ought to hate it, so I hate it. I mean, I'm not being facetious. This is true. But the people who put out those talking points, they're putting them out for a reason, for a specific reason. So why does Will King say there's no Black America and no white America, which, by the way, makes no sense because Black America has been discriminated against as a group, not as individuals. As a group, there are Supreme Court cases that specifically say that African Americans are insular, is an insular group, a group that has been discriminated against. The Supreme Court has said so. I told you Roger Taney said in the Dred Scott opinion, he lumped all Black folks together and said that they have no rights that we white people have to honor. He didn't say that on individualism. He said that as a group, they have no rights that we must respect as white people. All the discrimination and targeted against Black people as a group, not individuals. So why are conservatives now trying to flip this and say, oh, this is not about group discrimination. This is only about individual discrimination. Why are they doing that? There's something behind that. Why are they doing it? I just happen to know, because I'm a lawyer, I know where they're headed. And I'll tell you where they're headed. They're headed, again, to the 14th Amendment and every other law that redresses or addresses discrimination against Black Americans as a group, not individuals. The racism that impacts Black lives is not necessarily just individual racism. It is systemic racism. It is structural racism. It is institutionalized racism. It is racism that is a part of the various systems of America. The proof is indisputable when you look at disparities, for example, in the education system, in the criminal justice system, in the healthcare system. One of the things that is getting a lot of attention now in the healthcare system is the fact that Black women, their incident of dying during childbirth is way above whites and even Asians and Latinos. Why are so many young Black women dying while they're giving childbirth? It's because of the systemic racism in the healthcare system. Many of them are not insured. Many of them can't get insurance. Many of them cannot get the prenatal care that white women get. Many of them are disbelieved by white doctors when they say that they're in pain, when they say that they are feeling this way or that way. A lot of white doctors don't believe them. That is systemic. That is not the individual black woman going and experiencing individual racism. It is systemic. Okay? And we see those disparities throughout the systems of America. Will Kane, we see that throughout the systems of America. Will Kane. How does it implicate the 14th Amendment? Well, let's go back. Let's go back to the 14th Amendment. Well, if I go back, it's going to mess up things. So remember, the 14th Amendment gave us citizenship, gave black Americans citizenship. Then it gave black Americans protection of their privileges and immunities as citizens, and then due process rights, and then equal protection under the law. Because African Americans are a group of folks in America who has obviously experienced deep-seated white supremacy racism. 256 years of chattel slavery rebuts any denial of that. Another 100 years of black coal, sharecropping, contract labor, KKK terrorism rebuts any denial of that. And the last 70 years of systemic racism in the form of redlining, in the form of police shootings, high unemployment. I was trying to think of how homeowners in white communities would put certain covenants. That's what restrictive covenants. Restricted covenants in their deeds so that houses would not be sold to blacks. That's in the last 70, 80 years. After Jim Crow was supposedly dismantled, segregation, all the rest of it rebuts any denial that as a group, Will King, black Americans have suffered severe racism in this country. And so cases, amendments, and statutes that were enacted, that were added to the Constitution to protect black people as a group is what Will is trying to undermine. He's trying to say that those laws, those amendments, including the 14th Amendment, are not needed because, sure, there is individualized racism, but this whole group racism or systemic racism, that doesn't exist. Despite what the data says, that doesn't exist. So Stephen A., as a lawyer, does not know how to respond to that, and it just goes over his head. And meanwhile, Will King is able to say that without being challenged. Okay?
At affirmative action, but you as a black man would reap the benefits of affirmative action for the sins committed on someone of the past. We are only, in the end, Stephen A., individuals.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I get where you're coming from, and I can understand how you would look at it that way. You have to respect the fact that I have a different cultural background, a different experience than you, and I might feel a bit differently about it. What I would tell you is this. There's so many people, and the people that have been supportive of the Supreme Court's latest ruling are of the mindset that blacks were getting an unfair advantage. What black people would contend to you is that it wasn't an unfair advantage. Remember,
Notice. Stephen A. says nothing about that individualism that Will King started out in this conversation promoting, because Stephen A. doesn't understand what Will Keene is trying to accomplish. He doesn't know. He's not an attorney. He's a brilliant dude. He's a smart guy. He's a successful guy, but he doesn't know the law. He hasn't studied constitutional law. He doesn't know what Will Keene as an attorney knows. So Will is pushing an agenda. And what is that? What does it do when he says that? Why does he make it his point to end what he said with individualism? Because of the people who are listening to him, the Fox News listeners. They don't know what Will is talking about either, but they know this is Fox News and Will Keene is one of them, so they'll start saying it too. It's not blacks and whites. It's not that blacks suffered anything. It's individual. It's about the individual. And all you got to do is ask them to explain. They don't know what they're talking about. And this notion about why should this generation pay for the sins of the past? Let me explain something to you. My law firm right now is handling an injury case. A man hit our client from the rear, caused her some serious damage, and that man then left the country, went to another country, and he died, from what we were told, because of COVID. So the attorneys representing the insurance company said, this man is dead. He died of COVID in another country. Well, he committed a bad act. He caused damage to our client. Does the fact that he's dead mean that we now are out of options? There's nothing we can do? No, does not mean that. Because the law provides a way for us to say to his survivors, in this case, his son. We served his son, and we told his son, now that you say that your father has passed, you must step in the shoes of your father, and you must make our client good for the sins that your father committed. That's in the law, folks. That's in the law. We were able to do that under Texas law. Case wasn't over just because the person who did the injury died. No. We now were able to go after his survivors, his descendants, his children, whoever were going to handle his affairs had to answer our lawsuit. So we now have him in court, and he's standing in the shoes of his father. And that insurance company is going to have to take care of our client. So don't tell me this stuff about it's unfair that someone today has to pay for the sins of their forefather. The law sees it differently. The law sees it differently. Will Keene and others who make that argument. And Will said blacks benefit from affirmative action. That too needs to be challenged, because we know the biggest benefactor of affirmative action are white women. Black folks are not the biggest benefactors of affirmative action. And it's not benefiting. Affirmative action is simply trying to redress past wrongs and give qualified black people an opportunity to compete. I heard it this past week Someone quoted James Brown, who said, "Open the door and I'll go get it for myself." That's what affirmative action does, just opens the door for an otherwise qualified black person to have the same chance as everybody else. That ain't some sort of unfair advantage or benefit to black people. Get out of here. All right. Now, let me show you. Let's look at another video. That's enough of that. There's plenty more that I could say, but in the interest of time, let me get to another video.
We also need to remove the
of Ron DeSantis, who directly says that he wants to go after the 14th Amendment. Watch this.
We also need to remove the incentives to come illegally to begin with. And that means employment, that means taxpayer finance benefit. It also means this idea that you can come across the border 2 days later, have a child, and somehow that's an American citizen. That was not the original understanding of the 14th Amendment. And so we'll take action to force a clarification of that. But I think it's wrong that people would use our country for things like birth tourism. So we're going to be removing the incentive.
You heard it. You heard it right there. Ron DeSantis, and he's not the only one. Trump, this newcomer, Vivek, Ramsadani, I think his name is. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it. But he specifically says that he intends, if he's elected, first day, to go after the 14th Amendment. The citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment, which says if you're born here, you are a citizen. No matter how you got here, you are a citizen. Should we have strong borders? Yes, of course. Of course. Absolutely. But it's Congress's fault that the immigration policies have not been updated. That's Congress's fault, and that's both Democrats and Republicans. They talk all this stuff and do very little to really control, to really solve the issue. But gutting the 14th Amendment is not the solution. If you're born here, you are a citizen under our law, under our Constitution. But you hear DeSantis say that they're going to go after it. Now, I showed you the two ways, the only two ways they can go after it. With SCOTUS, which is not far-fetched, given that super majority conservative control they have there, or Article 5 of the Constitution. But you heard him say himself, we're going after the 14th Amendment. And see, here's the thing. It's a slippery slope, right? You go after the 14th Amendment and you deal with you get some changes or completely abolish it, or let's just say you get some changes to it regarding the citizenship clause here. Well, what's to stop the GOP from going after other parts of the 14th Amendment? What about the due process part? What about the equal protection part? After all, there is no more systemic racism, according to them. After all, there is no group racism. Everybody is an individual. So why do we even need the 14th Amendment anymore? It's giving an unfair advantage to blacks, and it's reverse discrimination against whites. So why do we need the 14th Amendment? And Clarence Thomas is sitting there on the court saying, yeah, that's right. Because we black Americans, we don't need the special help of the court anymore. We are no longer victims. We can stand on our own two legs. We can, that's what he's saying. And as Justice Jackson pointed out in her dissenting opinion in the recent affirmative action case, That is completely folly because we're not equal under the law. There are all sorts of disparities. There are all kinds of proof of systemic racism that she outlined in her opinion, and I could too. I do it all the time. I'm just trying to sound the alarm. Folks, I'm telling you, and especially you black folks, the GOP is on a warpath. Trump has radicalized them. Before he came, there were people who have always been committed to overturning anything that benefits or that tries to just give black folks a fair footing. But when he came on and tapped into that white fear, he basically has radicalized the entire GOP. And so all the presidential candidates now have to be and sound more extreme than the next one because they know the base is loyal to Trump. So they're coming after the 14th Amendment and any other law that was designed to help African Americans as a group. And so you see they're setting it up now. They're teeing it up when Will King, and even in this affirmative action case, Clarence Thomas and Justice Roberts all talked about the individual. The individual. The individual. We're not a group. It's individual. And we all know that it's not true. We know that white America treats black Americans different, poorly, discriminate against us as a group. Not just individuals, but as a group. Black people are this, black people are that, black people do this. In fact, many of them make the argument that it's black culture that is at the root of our problems. Well, that's grouping us all together. That's grouping us all together and saying that it's our group culture that is the root of the problem, not racism. If you listen carefully, they contradict themselves. So I'll end by saying we are in a serious fight. We're in a very, very, very serious fight. The GOP is on a warpath. This fight did not end with the Civil War. Donald Trump came on the scene after Barack Obama. He tapped into that white fear. And the country is in a quagmire right now. Someone who's facing 70 or so indictments could become the president of the United States of America. Why? Because half of the country are fearful of black and brown folks rising up, which obviously isn't happening. Just because Barack Obama was elected president, black Americans are still dealing with a whole lot of racism. Our community is still reeling from 400 years of a legacy of white supremacy. All right, the 155th anniversary of the 14th Amendment. We will end on that positive note, right? We'll end on that. Let me just bring it up again. And yeah, and thank you all for tuning in tonight. And, Chloe and I are considering doing our shows on Sunday evening rather than Saturday afternoon. If you have an opinion on that, please share that with us. Before I get out of here, I see that there are some comments. Some comments here. Some of them I don't understand. Adam Brashear says insurance companies still responsible. That is right. That is right. Adam says he's not that ignorant. Talking about Will King, Stephen A. Smith is. Yeah. Okay. And other comments. Thank you all for all the comments. Thank you all for tuning in. Yeah. Keep America in your prayers. We're dealing with a lot right now. Okay. I am out. Thank you again for tuning in. Peace, love, hope. Have a good week. This is Augustus Corbett, a.k.a. the Minister of Justice. You have been listening to the Defiant Lawyers. Bye.